Durehi from Hizb ut-Tahrir. Thank you for your time this afternoon. Firstly, if we can clear up what is happening on Friday night at this event in Lakemba.
Thank you, David. Allow me the opportunity to just take a step back for a moment. A lot of things have been happening quite quickly over the last few weeks and few months surrounding anti-terrorism, anti-terror laws, terror aid. So we need to take a step back and have a sense of perspective here. Effectively, what Tony Abbott's referring to is a lecture, no more, no less, and to characterise it in the way that he has, as if it is some evil intent that serves an existential purpose or threatens the existential purpose of this country, really is indicative of the level of discussion and debate that exists in this country at the moment. And for that reason, we all need to take a step back, because what we're effectively discussing here is 14 years of the war on terrorism. We're talking post 9/11. When we're talking about a particular narrative that characterises Muslims in a very bad light, and we need to question the legitimacy of this narrative, because on the one hand, Tony Abbott would like us all to believe, would like all Australians to believe, that the greatest threat to security, to peace, to justice is encapsulated in the existence of Muslims. But on the other hand, we're expected to turn a blind eye to a foreign occupation, to economic exploitation, to propping up dictators and tyrants in the Muslim world, the likes of which Tony Abbott is very comfortable to shake hands with.
Let me just get back to Friday night then. It's a lecture, you said. By whom?
Well, the fact that we're having this discussion over one lecture is indicative of how the entire war on narrative goes. The fact that what's being questioned is the actions of a Muslim group, a lecture, no more, no less, and no one is discussing the fact that Australian fighter jets have been sent over to the Muslim world, that American troops...
Well, that is being discussed quite extensively. I'm just asking you directly what Friday night's about. Who's the lecture by?
Well, it's very obvious. Tony Abbott has indicated that it's organised by ourselves, by Hizb ut-Tahrir. But again, I want to stress the point, I really want to stress the point that for the most part, in the context of the war on terror, the discussion is about what Muslims are doing. And in effect, what the war on terror represents is the policing of the Muslim response to the war on terror. Now, Tony Abbott would like us all to believe that this response is inherently violent. The fact that groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir exist is because they are at the forefront of challenging what they regard to be tyranny and dictatorship, and no less more than the fact that this is done at the hands of Western governments, exactly like the Australian government. The fact that we are exposing the crime, this is the problem, David.
I'm just trying to establish who is giving the lecture on Friday night, or is there some reason why you can't say? I'm just trying to establish what's caused all of this.
Well, I'll tell you exactly what has caused all of this. The lecture has been made publicly available long before Tony Abbott decided to open his mouth to make a politicized issue. The speaker is well known. It's advertised publicly. But to portray it in a particular way, the speaker's name is Ismail Awahwa. And it's very well known, and it's as the lecture itself has been publicly advertised, so too has the speaker, and so too has the contents. And in fact, what is most disconcerting is that somehow the discussion in this country has come to a point where highlighting the crimes of foreign occupation, to the extent that dismissing 500,000 lives of Iraqis as a mere embarrassment, as John Howard does, we can so casually dismiss this narrative and pretend that the greatest threat to all of us represents Muslims who are highlighting these crimes. The purpose of this lecture is to demonstrate that what Australia will be doing in Iraq and Syria, like its allies, America and others, like they did 10 years ago in Iraq, will be absolutely disastrous. And they are not there for humanitarian purposes, they are there for purposes of political expediency. We've seen 3 years the Assad regime has slaughtered more than 300,000, has displaced countless millions, and no one has raised an eyelid on this point.
If I can just butt in here, I'll just butt in here. I appreciate that's your view of the American and Australian intervention, but can I ask whether the view of Hizb ut-Tahrir and the speaker who will be giving this lecture on Friday night is that ISIL, Islamic State, whatever you call them, is actually doing good rather than evil? Is that your view?
Well, to be quite frank, I wouldn't dignify the question with a response. The issue is not ISIS.
Why not? What's wrong with that question?
I'll tell you exactly why that is the case. I'll tell you why Tony Abbott has described our speech as hate speech. Do you know what we hate? We hate foreign intervention. We hate foreign occupation. We hate
I appreciate
the
that. I've
imposing
got that. I'm just asking what your view is on
sanctions. This is what we hate. We hate the imposition of sanctions that kills over 1 million Iraqis. This is what we hate. And the fact that we stand for this is why we've been given the attention that we have today.
Okay, and we've heard you say that a few times now. I'm just asking, what is your view of ISIL?
Well, my view is irrelevant. What I would say very clearly is that the context in which ISIS was born has remained for a long time, and for the foreseeable future will remain. And it is in this context that groups like ISIS and other groups exist. They exist as a reaction to the conditions on the ground and conditions which governments like Australia directly contribute to. And irrespective of whether we agree or disagree with ISIS, let me explain something very clearly.
Let me just ask you this. Surely this is the most relevant point here. Whether Hizb ut-Tahrir believes ISIS is a cause worth fighting for, that is the most relevant point here.
Well, according to Tony Abbott, would be, and I would expect him to say that, because again, the entire narrative.
I'm just asking whether you think that is the case.
Let me explain why I regard that question to be a distraction. Because the entire war on narrative is designed to focus specifically on the reaction of the Muslims to the terror inflicted upon it. And so questions surrounding Hizb ut-Tahrir, questions surrounding ISIS, and questions surrounding this group or that group is indicative of that narrative that seeks to alter
there wouldn't be so many questions if we just had an answer on this. Is there an answer on this, though? How do you view ISIS? Do you believe it's a cause worth fighting for?
There is a very clear answer. What I'm opposed to is a level of oppression, of barbarity that far exceeds anything ISIS would even imagine doing. And that's represented in the actions of governments like Australia and its allies like America. ISIS could not even imagine the level of barbarity inflicted upon the Iraqis. John Howard dismissed 500,000 lives of mothers and fathers and children as a mere embarrassment. What level of barbarity would have to be accrued in order to draw such drastic conclusions? This is why the war on terror is a problem, and that's why the question itself is a problem.
In all of this condemnation you've made of Australia, of America, not one word of condemnation of ISIS. Am I reading that right?
You're absolutely reading it wrong, David. You're only interested in a particular response that entrenches the war on terror narrative. And I'm saying very clearly and very unequivocally that the Muslims, by virtue of their Islam, are the most proudest, the most moral and virtuous, and have the greatest concern for the sanctity of all lives. The Australian government cannot say that. America cannot say that.
You cannot say that ISIS respects the sanctity of all lives. You cannot say ISIS respects the sanctity of all lives, given what they've done to not just Westerners, but to Shia, to Kurds, to Christians, to many others in Syria and Iraq.
I'm glad you asked that question, because rightfully, all of us should be outraged at the killing of innocent lives, all of us. But we should apply this argument consistently. We should adopt this moral standard as a fixed value system.
You're not condemning ISIS in any way.
I'm condemning something which is infinitely greater in barbarity than anything ISIS has ever done or could even imagine doing. I'm condemning a set of policies that have cost the lives of over 1 million Iraqis. And it is the same policy that is being enacted once again with the war on terror rhetoric. And we all should be opposed.
But how is it more barbarous? How is it more barbarous to defend against terrorists that kill innocent people?
Because we are blind to what is known as state-sponsored terrorism. We are blind to that. We are blind to the fact that John Howard dismissed 500,000 Iraqi lives as a mere embarrassment. What level of barbarity must exist in the mindset that can so casually dismiss 500,000 deaths? This is the problem with the discussion in the war on terror, is that it so drastically alters the victim-aggressor paradigm, as if to suggest that the victims of Western terrorism are in fact themselves the greatest threat to civilization.
All right. But does that justify in any way what ISIS is doing? Does that justify what ISIS is doing right now?
The discussion is not about ISIS. The discussion is about Al-Qaeda. The discussion is not even about Hizb ut-Tahrir. Of course it's not. According to Tony Abbott, he would love it to be. He would love the focus and the attention to be upon the Muslim response. But the fact is, groups like ISIS,
I'm not talking about the Muslim response. I'm talking about ISIS. Now, I'm just asking whether you think what they're doing right now in Iraq and Syria is justified in any way.
I'm saying unequivocally that all of us should be, in principle, opposed to the killing of any civilian, any level of barbarity. My problem, though, is that this argument is so selectively applied to just Muslim groups. Why do we dismiss this moral compass when it comes to critiquing or interrogating the actions of the Australian government or its allies in America? This is the problem. We want the focus to be not just on the actions of certain individuals or groups, but upon those entities that are causing the most destruction around the world, the likes of which ISIS could not even imagine. And that is what fundamentally is the problem with the war on terror narrative. It dismisses what is effectively state-sponsored terrorism on the greatest scale ever known to us.
Let me ask you just a final question. The proposed anti-terror laws that would make it an offence to promote, encourage, counsel, urge the doing of a terrorist act, do you believe that can or could potentially catch out Hizb ut-Tahrir?
Well, I wouldn't dismiss the possibility. Again, Tony Abbott, through these laws, is institutionalising this war on terror narrative as if to suggest that the focus should be entirely upon the Muslim response. We are a political party who carry political views, who are exposing the crimes of Western governments like the Australian government for the barbarity and the fact that they cause so much death and destruction around the world. Because Tony Abbott cannot confront those ideas, would seek to divert the public's attention away from the reality of his foreign policies, it is for this reason that groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir are getting the attention they are today. And this is the problem.
All right. All right. I think we've got your point of view on all of this, Wasim Durahi. We do appreciate you joining us this afternoon. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
We will take a break and then back with more. Stay with us on PM Agenda.